At 0730 hours on November 1, 1943, Lieutenant General Alexander van de Grift stood on the bridge of the command ship Macaulay with his hands resting lightly on the rail, watching as the coast of Bougainville slowly emerged from a shifting curtain of morning mist. The sea was calm, the horizon pale, the air heavy with the quiet before violence. In just 2 hours, 14,000 Marines of the 3rd Marine Division would spill out of landing craft and storm the beaches of Empress Augusta Bay. Behind those beaches lay the next step of a long, brutal campaign. And far beyond them, 250 miles northwest, was the fortress that haunted the thoughts of every Allied commander, Rabaul. The Japanese had 110,000 troops dug in around Rabaul. Those men were supposed to stop exactly what Van de Grift was about to attempt, but they were not coming, not yet. Van de Grift, who had commanded at Guadalcanal and seen firsthand the cost of attacking fortified Japanese positions, understood the weight of what waited beyond Bougainville. He had learned the truth the hard way. When you attacked a Japanese stronghold, you bled. Island fighting in the Solomons had consumed thousands of lives for patches of ground barely visible on a map. 3 weeks from now, the Americans would take Tarawa and lose over 3,000 men, capturing an island barely 2 miles long. Rabaul was not 2 miles long. Rabaul was a fortress that made Tarawa look like a warm-up drill. The Japanese had captured Rabaul from a small Australian garrison in early 1942. For the next 20 months, they poured labor, concrete, steel, sweat, and blood into transforming the site into the most heavily defended position in the entire South Pacific. Simpson Harbor could anchor 100 ships. 5 major airfields formed a defensive ring, each one capable of launching Japan's heaviest bombers. 367 anti-aircraft guns covered every approach, 43 coastal defense guns guarded the beaches, and over 6,000 machine guns were buried in bunkers and pillboxes. They carved hundreds of miles of tunnels into volcanic rock, deep hospitals, munition stockpiles, living quarters buried so far beneath the surface that no American bomb could touch them. Over 100,000 Japanese soldiers, sailors, and airmen lived in that underground city by mid-1943. To the Allies, Rabaul was not just a base. It was the Pearl Harbor of the South Pacific. Every major Allied strategy document since Guadalcanal pointed to one ultimate objective: take Rabaul. Control it, and the Allies controlled the South Pacific. General Douglas MacArthur called it the key to the entire theater. Admiral Ernest King identified it as the primary target of 1943. The combined chiefs of staff approved Operation Cartwheel specifically to encircle and capture the fortress by early 1944. But inside the planning rooms, intelligence reports raised a terrible truth. Taking Rabaul in a frontal assault would cost more American lives than any battle since the Civil War. The Japanese had learned from every defeat of 1942, every landing, every bombardment. They built defenses to nullify America's advantages. Strategic bombing would be crippled by tunnels. Air support would fly into walls of anti-aircraft fire. Numerical superiority would melt under the sheer volume of defensive fire. Analysts estimated a landing would produce 30% casualties. Naval historian Samuel Eliot Morison would later write that Tarawa, Iwo Jima, and Okinawa would seem like pale pink compared to the blood that would have flowed had the Allies attacked Fortress Rabaul head-on. And yet, throughout 1942 and 1943, the Americans tried to break the fortress by air. The first senior officer to die attempting it was Brigadier General Kenneth Walker. Walker believed that strategic bombing, properly executed, could win wars without sending ground troops into meat grinders. Rabaul became his proving ground. He flew his first mission in September 1942, but Japanese anti-aircraft fire and swarming fighters made serious damage nearly impossible. Still, Walker insisted, hit them again and harder. Destroy aircraft on the ground. sink ships in the harbor, crater runways faster than they could be repaired. On January 5, 1943, Walker finally got his chance to make a statement. He personally led 6 B-17s and 6 B-24s on a high noon strike over Simpson Harbor, against General Kenny's explicit orders to attack at dawn. Japanese fighters from multiple airfields rose to meet them, and anti-aircraft guns filled the sky with steel. Walker's B-17, San Antonio Rose, was hit almost immediately. But he held formation, pressing the attack. His bombardiers scored direct hits on ships below, but 15 Japanese fighters swarmed the formation. The B built closer airfields and mounted the largest raid yet, 349 aircraft striking all 5 airfields at once. Reports claimed devastating success, 100 aircraft destroyed, runways shattered, fuel dumps blazing. The newspapers loved it. Washington loved it. But it wasn't real. In just 36 hours, Japanese engineers repaired every runway. The fuel dumps had been mostly empty. The Japanese had lost fewer than 20 aircraft. The photos looked dramatic, but Rabaul remained untouched. Then came November 2nd. 72 B-25s and 80 P-38s attacked at wave-top height, their propellers throwing salt spray into the air. It was the most dangerous mission the 5th Air Force had flown. And it came one day after Japan reinforced the base with 173 elite carrier pilots, the best remaining aviators from the Zuikaku, Shokaku, and Zuho. The Americans flew into a nightmare. 9 B-25s and 10 P-38s didn't return. Among the dead was Major Raymond Wilkins, whose bravery over the harbor earned him the Medal of Honor. The damage inflicted on Japan was minor. Rabaul still stood. Across New Guinea, the ground war was chewing up men at an equally shocking rate. Buna and Gunna, 2 tiny villages, cost 3,000 casualties and took 3 months to capture. Disease claimed more men than bullets. Every objective, every ridge, every swamp, every coconut log bunker, cost more than predicted. If tiny positions demanded weeks of blood, what would it take to storm the most fortified base in the Japanese Empire? Mathematics, not emotion, began steering the war. And the numbers simply did not work. The idea that transformed the Pacific War didn't come from a single moment of brilliance. It came from decades-old theory, an idea written in 1921 by a Marine major named Earl Ellis. You could beat Japan by bypassing strong points instead of taking them head-on. Starve them. Cut supply lines. Move around them. Make them irrelevant. General George C. Marshall, the Army Chief of Staff, revived that idea in 1943. Marshall, a calm, analytical strategist, studied the intelligence reports and saw the truth no one wanted to accept. Rabaul wasn't a strategic prize, it was a trap. Assaulting it would require 75,000 troops and kill at least 20,000 Americans before the first phase line was secured. And even if taken, Rabaul offered nothing the Allies needed. It was simply a base that could be neutralized by isolation rather than conquest. General George Kenny came to the same conclusion from a pilot's perspective. He realized Rabaul's defenses were too vast, too dispersed, too hardened to destroy from the air. But he didn't need to destroy it. He only needed to render it useless. Build airfields close enough, and Allied fighters would patrol the skies every day. Bombers could crater the runways faster than Japan could fill them. Submarines and patrol planes could sink every ship approaching Simpson Harbor. Rabaul would suffocate behind a wall of Allied air and sea power. 100,000 Japanese troops would sit helplessly in their tunnels while the war moved on without them. But one man still stood in the way: Douglas MacArthur. He had been planning for 2 years to capture Rabaul. The idea of bypassing it felt like treason against his entire strategy. Yet Kenny persisted, showing him projections, explaining how bypassing Rabaul would accelerate the return to the Philippines, reminding him of the promise MacArthur had made when he fled in 1942. That argument, not tactics, not logistics, finally broke MacArthur's resistance. Meanwhile, in the South Pacific, Admiral William Bull Halsey proved bypassing was more than theory. Instead of attacking the heavily fortified island of Kolombangara, he landed troops on lightly defended Vella La Vella, letting the Japanese garrison rot on its own. The strategy worked flawlessly. By August 1943, the debate reached the highest levels. At the Quebec Conference, Marshall made his case before Roosevelt, Churchill, King, and the British Chiefs of Staff. He laid out the facts. Attacking Rabaul would be a catastrophic waste of lives and would stall the advance toward Japan. King backed him, bluntly stating that the Navy did not have the ships to support both a Rabaul assault and the Central Pacific offensive. MacArthur's representative argued passionately for capturing Rabaul, but Marshall had the final word. "How many Marines is Rabaul worth?" he asked. No one could answer. On August 24, 1943, the combined chiefs issued their decision. Rabaul would not be invaded. It would be isolated. The directive reached MacArthur in Brisbane on September 17. He read it silently. For over a year, his staff had prepared for the assault. Maps, estimates, logistics, landing plans, all suddenly irrelevant. But MacArthur adapted. If they wanted bypass operations, he would deliver them faster and more aggressively than anyone expected. The objective shifted instantly from Rabaul to the Philippines. The real test of this new strategy began on November 1, 1943, the morning Van de Grift watched Bougainville emerge from the mist. As the Marines landed, the Japanese garrison at Rabaul moved to respond. A cruiser force steamed south from Truk, aiming to destroy the landing force at Empress Augusta Bay. Admiral Halsey reacted with characteristic speed. He ordered carrier strikes against Rabaul itself. On November 5, Rear Admiral Frederick Sherman launched 97 aircraft from Saratoga and Princeton. He knew exactly what he was doing, sending carrier planes against the most heavily defended base in the Pacific. Rabaul could throw 300 anti-aircraft guns and hundreds of fighters into the sky. But the cruisers had to be stopped. At dawn, the strike group reached Simpson Harbor. The Japanese cruiser force lay at anchor, crews scrambling, sirens wailing. American dive bombers rolled in, screaming toward their targets through storms of anti-aircraft fire. In 18 minutes, they crippled multiple cruisers and forced the entire Japanese relief force to withdraw. Rabaul, the mighty fortress, the base that could not be invaded, had been neutralized not by conquest, but by pressure, isolation, and relentless air attack from newly captured fields. And in that moment, the bypass strategy proved itself. The Allies had found a way to defeat a fortress without ever setting foot inside it. And Rabaul, once the crown jewel of Japan's Pacific Empire, would spend the rest of the war entombed, its 100,000 defenders trapped, powerless, and slowly starving, while the Allies swept past toward the Philippines, toward the Marianas, and ultimately toward Japan itself. Rabaul had not been taken. It had been made irrelevant. And sometimes, in war, that is the most decisive victory of all.